Welcome to episode 2 of the Ask Ron T Show. This week's episode is about sports nutrition. We got a bunch of questions for that, so let's get into it.
So, I have a question for Dr. T. How does he get his hair that high?
That's you're probably not the only one with that question.
It gets higher every time I come in.
Do the nutritional needs of athletes differ from non-athletes?
Yes, the nutritional needs of athletes are quite different than the basics are the same, but the needs are a lot different. I think everything really comes back to hydration. Hydration is a key point in a lot of different things. So besides getting into too much detail right here on this question, the biggest thing that an athlete has to watch over, say, somebody that just sits at a desk all day is their hydration intake. Hydration is huge even to prevent sports injuries. I mean, if you think about what muscle tissue is, and dehydrated meat is beef jerky. And so beef jerky, if you've ever seen a belt, beef jerky doesn't move very easily. It's very dehydrated. That's the same thing that happens when you don't drink enough water. And so it's a lot easier to end up with sports injuries if you're not hydrated properly. So hydration, electrolyte balance, those are the number one things I think right off the bat that come off the top of my head from this question. Otherwise, we can go down a rabbit hole of exactly what you need to take in as an athlete. But to keep it simple, if you keep your hydration up, you're going to have your energy levels will be up. You'll prevent more injuries. And those are two most important things.
Are there certain dietary guidelines athletes should follow?
I think having a balanced diet, no matter who you are, is important. It's not, these fad diets where everybody's like, oh, I'm eating a paleo diet, I'm eating, whatever kind of diet. There's all these fads that kind of come in and out of, popularity. The biggest thing that I see is if you stay balanced. Stay balanced. What I mean by that is, a very simple approach that I have, and again, I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm answering these based on, things that I've experimented with, things that I kind of talk to my patients and athletes about. So, when I'm looking at my plate, you want to have carbohydrates, fats, and protein. They all have to be on that plate for that meal. For breakfast, lunch, dinner, or any other meal you have, if you have those three things on there, in relative proportion, you're going to be doing a good job with your nutrition.
Which is better for replacing fluids, water or sports drinks?
Okay, so that's kind of a little bit of a loaded question because there are some good sports drinks out there, but the majority, the way I tend to go is I would rather drink water, but there is such a thing that you can drink too much water and end up peeing out all your electrolytes. And then you end up dehydrated. There's been races where I've been at, or Ironman I've been at, and you see people carrying around this huge jug of water and they're just chugging it, thinking they're going to catch up on their nutrition. But what they're actually doing is more extracellular fluid rather than intracellular fluid. Intracellular fluid is your true hydration. Water's in your cells, you're truly hydrated. What that's going to do, extracellular fluid, you pound all this water and then you end up just peeing it out, and along with that comes your electrolytes. So you end up the next day starting your event, your race, whatever, you're already ready to cramp. I've heard that so many times where an athlete will come and be like, man, I was doing a triathlon, I was in the swim and I immediately cramped. I'm like, yeah, you did that. You basically dehydrated yourself before the race or before the event. So sports drinks do have a lot of sugar too, so you don't want to be taking in a ton of sugar. So again, balanced intake of water. You should be working on your hydration well before your event, not trying to cram. It's like cramming for a test. It never works. In the summertime here in Texas, it's really hot. Even me in general, I work out a lot, so I find myself taking electrolyte tabs. I take 2, they're well balanced, not really many ingredients. I take 2 in the morning to start my day with 20 ounces of water. So that seems to get me going. And in the summer, I take 2 before bed too, and it really just kind of helps me hydrate and keep my electrolyte profile where it should be. So that's just what I prefer. But again, 1 sport drink a day during the summer to keep your electrolyte profile is fine. It's just you got to watch the sugar intake. That's the thing that I see as the negative.
Is it true that athletes should eat a lot of carbs?
My personal opinion, no. I think, again, it comes back to that balanced diet. Me personally, I do eat a higher fat diet. That's just what my body is. That's what my body likes. And so I feel like as you kind of experiment with a diet, you should kind of take a mental note of how you actually feel. Don't just go because somebody tells you you need to do this. 2 years ago when I gave up bread, it wasn't because I was trying to do anything in particular. It just didn't make me feel good. And so I really work well on a higher fat diet. But I do keep track. Like, I don't track anymore, but your macros, you can always kind of go onto some of these apps and start tracking your meals to make sure your macros are watching your carbohydrates, your fats, and your proteins, and making sure the percentages aren't crazy, right? Where I kind of sit, my fat content's higher, so I'm like 50% of my diet's fat. And then I always keep protein about 10%. And so then I alter my carbs and fats as I go through. The whole idea of carb loading, I'm sure you've heard that before. Carb loading, if you're doing an event or CrossFit event or running event, theoretically you have enough sugar in your body to last 2 hours without taking in anything. So you really don't need to carb load. Carb load, I used to joke around, just makes you fat and slow, honestly. Before a meal, you want to maybe top off, or before a race, I'm sorry, you want to maybe top off your glycogen stores. So what that means, or what that could include, that just includes like a couple extra sweet potatoes, but you're still maintaining what I kind of answered in a question before is on that plate needs to be carbs, fats, and proteins, right? And as long as you're balanced there, and then maybe sprinkle in a little bit of carbs just to top off, but you don't need to go overboard where they have pasta and all this kind of stuff. It could really cause a lot of GI upset the next day before your event because you're a little nervous. And so you add that on top of it, and that's where you'll start getting that stomach ache and just queasy feeling.
When and what should I eat before I compete?
Wow, that's such a personal preference. That takes a lot of experimentation. Again, it's such a personal preference. There really isn't a right answer for that. You kind of want to eat stuff that's low glycemic index that doesn't just spike your sugar levels. Low glycemic index means that it burns slower. So like an apple, low glycemic index, burns slower, right? When you put in candy, high glycemic index. That means your sugar goes in, sugar goes out, and you crash. So you want stuff on a lower glycemic index level so that you kind of maintain your energy levels throughout whatever event that you have.
Will eating sugary foods before an event hurt my performance?
I think you just have to watch out with GI upset. Again, my background comes from, recent background comes from triathlon type things, so the problem with triathletes is they get so reliant on sugar. I really feel like that's part of why they get a lot of overuse injuries too. Granted, they train a lot, but they get so reliant on sugar because they are training so much that they constantly are trying to get their body to stay at that level, so they're consuming a ton of sugar. But before an event, as long as your balanced diet is everything's kind of good leading up to it, you can top off again with a little sugar like those. You see those gel packs, and you can kind of do one of those right before your race, which pretty much they're 100% sugar. But that'll just top off those glycogen stores, and it shouldn't bother you. That shouldn't be enough to put you overboard.
What is carbohydrate loading, and is it a good idea before an event?
I think I kind of answered that one, right? Yeah, so carb loading is the idea of consuming a ton of carbohydrates right before an event in the hopes that you get some kind of energy from it. But at the end of the day, I think it makes you fat and slow. A well-balanced diet is what's important. So a question I answered previously about looking at your plate, making sure you have fats, proteins, carbohydrates on there. Before an event, maybe adding a little bit of, just a little extra carbs. But other than that, you don't need to go crazy with this pasta, and it tends to cause a lot of GI upset for your event the next day.
Should I take extra vitamins and minerals?
Again, I think you should start listening to your body. So there's certain things that you can kind of take as an athlete that you'd end up getting depleted on. I think we touched on electrolytes before. I think supplementing with increased electrolytes to help your hydration is a necessity, especially in a warmer climate like Texas. it doesn't even matter what sport you are in this warmer climate, you are losing a ton of electrolytes. So supplementing with that isn't a bad idea. But then, there's stuff you can do. You can get blood work. You can kind of see what you're low on. I know in the wintertime, I use a lot of vitamin D. Vitamin D is good for basically a lot of the processes that go on in your body from like testosterone production. It helps your immune system. So I tend to use a lot more of that in the winter when I'm indoors a little bit, as opposed to in the summer when I'm outside in the sun a lot. So like that, you can kind of use different supplements different times a year depending on what your needs are. You can do blood tests to kind of figure that out. I think I just mentioned that, but that's just what comes to the top of my head. You got to just know your body, just like with anything in your diet, knowing what foods agree with you, what don't make you feel good. Like, again, I mentioned before that the bread and wheat, just not that I don't even think I'm allergic to it. It just, I realize that if I eat it, I just don't feel good. I don't perform as good. I don't think as good. It's like it clouds me. So starting to pay attention to your body is what's important.
Will extra protein help build muscle mass?
Wow, I think this can be argued. This is one of those that I think people can argue both ways, because I'm sure you're going to get some bodybuilders that would argue that they've eaten protein, they just crush it, and then that's what they swear by. I'm on the approach of balance. I don't think so. I mean, again, sometimes I feel like it could help. One thing that I do use after every workout is some branched chain amino acids. I use BCAAs a lot. One thing that it does for me is, branched chain amino acids are the breakdown molecules, amino acids of protein. Immediately after a workout, you want to try to get something into your body. You'd like it to be normal food, but a lot of the times you can't get to food. So I really try to keep those on hand. They help curb my appetite right out, and I'm getting something quality in my system right after. So that helps me. But as far as just loading up on protein to build muscle, we would have to talk to somebody else about that. I'm more along the lines of balance.
Why is iron so important?
Iron, well, iron's definitely a lot more important in the female population, right? You have to be careful with if you're taking some iron supplements due to unnatural iron is not really absorbed into your body. It can cause constipation, GI upset, irritation. Iron is one of the building blocks of your red blood cells. So, you can kind of end up feeling fatigued, run down, all that kind of stuff, because you're not processing, your blood isn't as quality, right? And so if you're low on iron, you just don't have that energy level that you normally would, right? So you can get iron from a lot of different sources. One of the best sources for iron, I have this little weird drink concoction that I do every morning, and I add blackstrap molasses to it. Blackstrap molasses is one of the most natural forms of iron you can get on this planet, and it's natural, so it doesn't cause any GI upset. The other good thing about blackstrap molasses is it balances your insulin levels first thing in the morning. So it's a very low glycemic index. It kind of sets your insulin levels so you don't just get up, eat breakfast, and spike your sugar. Because when you have spiked sugar, sugar turns to fat, weight gain, and all that kind of stuff. So iron is extremely important. Again, females more than males, and that's it.
Should I take an iron supplement?
I think you should. When it comes to iron, I think the best way to kind of look at that is blood work. I think if you're feeling run down, fatigued, your best idea, well, even run down and fatigued, even if you think you need iron, I would suggest blood work, because could be a bunch of hormonal qualities that need to be looked at. There could be other disease processes that you need to look at. So my medical advice on that is honestly check with your primary care, get some blood work, and go from there. If you're low on iron, again, go back to a natural source of iron, not anything fake, because it can cause GI upset and constipation. So the most natural form of iron you can find, but let's start with some blood work.
Why is calcium so important?
Calcium is part of an electrolyte profile also. So I'm kind of going to speak from the terms of an athlete here. Is again, that seems like this Ask Dr. or Ask Ron T show is very electrolyte based. I mean, I'm talking a lot about that, but calcium is one part of your electrolyte profiles. So it has, by itself, any of those by themselves, you end up just peeing out, honestly. So that's why the profile of all of them together. And what I mean by all of them is sodium chloride, calcium, magnesium. They got to go together, right? If you just put sodium without chloride, then you're not going to absorb it into your system. They need to be, the molecule needs to have a carrier. So it needs to have that other carrier to use it in your body, right? So calcium's the same way. So if you go to Costco and buy a big tub of calcium thinking it's going to help your bones, and it doesn't have anything else in it, again, it's just a waste of money. You're putting it in your system, it's coming right out, and you're not actually absorbing it into your bones. So again, going back to that electrolyte profile, making sure that that's well done. But then if you do have some bone loss or that kind of stuff, you can check with your medical provider first before you decide to take a calcium supplement. Get blood work, actually make sure it's something that you need or that you need to increase.